The morning air was cold, and Robert pulled his old military jacket tighter around his chest. He'd been sitting on the same spot outside Riverside Mall for 3 hours now, watching people rush past him like he was invisible. Most didn't even glance his way. Those who did quickly looked away, as if homelessness might be contagious. His cardboard sign leaned against the brick wall behind him. Homeless veteran. Anything helps, God bless. The words were fading now, just like he felt he was fading from the world. 3 years ago, he had a name that people respected. Now he was just another face in the crowd that nobody wanted to see. Robert's stomach growled. He'd had half a sandwich yesterday that someone had left on a bench. That was it. But hunger wasn't the worst part anymore. He'd gotten used to that. The worst part was the silence, the loneliness, the feeling that he'd become less than human in everyone's eyes. A little girl walked past with her mother, and she stared at Robert with wide, curious eyes. "Mommy, why is that man sitting there?" Her mother pulled her along quickly. "Don't stare, sweetie. Come on." Robert managed a sad smile. He didn't blame them. He probably looked scary with his overgrown beard and wrinkled clothes. He barely recognized himself anymore when he caught his reflection in store windows. The automatic doors of the mall whooshed open and closed, open and closed. Each time Robert caught a glimpse of the warm, bright world inside. And each time he saw it, the grand piano sitting right there in the center of the mall's main floor, gleaming under the lights like a jewel. His heart ached every time he looked at it. That piano, it called to him like a siren song, pulling at something deep in his chest. His fingers moved on their own sometimes, pressing invisible keys on his lap, playing songs that only he could hear. It had been 3 years since he'd touched a real piano. 3 long years since the last time his fingers had danced across those black and white keys. Sometimes it felt like another lifetime. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. Robert closed his eyes and let himself remember. The concert halls. The applause. The way his mother cried happy tears in the front row during his performances. The students who looked up to him when he taught at the music academy. The respect in people's voices when they said his name. All of that was gone now. Disappeared like smoke. A group of teenagers burst through the mall doors, laughing and shoving each other playfully. Robert watched them head straight for the piano. One of them, a boy with expensive sneakers and a designer jacket, sat down and started banging on the keys. It wasn't music. It was just noise. His friends crowded around, cheering him on like he was doing something amazing. Robert winced. He didn't mean to judge them. They were just kids having fun. But something inside him twisted painfully. That instrument deserved better. It deserved to sing, not to be beaten like a drum. More people gathered around the piano now, taking pictures and videos. Someone else sat down and played a simple song with one finger. Everyone clapped. Robert's hands trembled in his lap. He'd been trained on a piano just like that one. Started when he was 5 years old. His mother had worked 2 jobs to pay for his lessons. She'd believed in him when everyone said they were wasting their money. "That boy has a gift," his first teacher had said. And she'd been right. By the time Robert was 16, he was performing in competitions. By 20, he was playing in symphony orchestras. By 25, he'd won awards and scholarships. He'd performed for thousands of people. Critics called him brilliant, gifted, extraordinary. Then he'd made the decision that changed everything. He'd enlisted in the army. People thought he was crazy. Why would you throw away your career? They'd asked. But Robert had felt something missing. He'd wanted to serve his country. He'd wanted to do something that mattered beyond concert halls and tuxedos. The military had been hard, but he'd been proud of his service. 2 tours overseas. He'd seen things, done things that still woke him up at night, sweating and shaking. When he came back, he wasn't the same person. The music was still in his head, but something had broken inside him. Every time he tried to play, his hands would shake. His heart would race. The sounds would take him back to places he didn't want to go. The panic attacks started small, then got worse. He'd be in the middle of teaching a class and suddenly he couldn't breathe. He'd be practicing for a performance and the room would start spinning. The loud crash of piano keys sounded too much like the sounds from over there. The sounds he was trying to forget. He lost his teaching job, then his apartment. His savings ran out. Friends drifted away, not knowing how to help someone who was drowning. The bills piled up. The calls from creditors wouldn't stop. And then, one day, Robert found himself on the street with everything he owned in a backpack. That was 3 years ago. A security guard walked past, eyeing Robert suspiciously. Robert had learned to read those looks. It meant, "Move along soon or I'll make you." He nodded respectfully at the guard, trying to show he wasn't causing trouble. Inside the mall, the piano sat silent now. The teenagers had moved on to something else. The beautiful instrument stood alone, waiting. Robert's fingers moved again, playing a melody on his thighs. Rachmaninoff. He'd always loved Rachmaninoff. The music was powerful, emotional, full of pain and beauty all mixed together, just like life. An elderly couple walked by and dropped $1 in his cup. "Thank you," Robert said quietly. "God bless you." They smiled kindly and kept walking. That dollar brought his total for the day to $3.47. Enough for a cheap burger, maybe. Or he could save it for tomorrow. But Robert wasn't thinking about food anymore. He was staring at that piano through the glass doors. Something was building inside him, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. It was terrifying and exciting all at once. What if he went in there? What if he asked to play just once? Just for a few minutes? The thought made his heart pound. What would people say? They'd probably laugh at him. Call security. Tell him to get out. Who would let a homeless man touch an expensive piano? But the desire was so strong it hurt. His fingers ached to feel those keys again, to remember what it felt like to create something beautiful, to be more than just an invisible man on the sidewalk. Robert stood up slowly. His legs were stiff from sitting so long. He picked up his small backpack and brushed off his pants. They were dirty and torn, but they were all he had. His heart hammered in his chest. His hands shook. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to sit back down. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't give people another reason to look down on you. But another voice, quieter and deeper, whispered something different. It whispered that he was still Robert. Still the boy who'd made his mother cry happy tears. Still the man who'd played for thousands. Still the pianist who'd won competitions and earned respect. That piano was just 50 feet away. 50 feet might as well be a mile when you're wearing shame like a heavy coat. Robert took a deep breath. The morning cold bit at his face. He looked down at his hands, weathered and dirty but still strong. Still capable. Then he walked toward the mall entrance, his legs feeling like they might give out any second. The automatic doors sensed him coming and opened wide as if welcoming him in. He had no idea what would happen next. He only knew he had to try. Because staying on that sidewalk, staying silent, staying invisible, that was a different kind of death. The piano was waiting. And for the first time in 3 years, Robert was ready to face his music again. The warm air inside the mall hit Robert's face like a wave. It smelled like cinnamon rolls and expensive perfume. Bright lights made him squint after sitting in the dim morning cold for so long. Everything felt too loud, too bright, too much. He took 2 steps inside and froze. A security guard was already walking toward him. The man's face wasn't mean, but it wasn't friendly either. Robert knew that look. He'd seen it 100 times before. "Sir?" The guard's hand rested on his belt, not threatening but ready. "I'm going to need you to step back outside." Robert's mouth went dry. His courage, which had felt so strong 30 seconds ago, started crumbling. I just wanted to... No soliciting inside the mall. You know the rules. I'm not here to ask for money." Robert's voice came out smaller than he wanted. "I just want to play the piano. Just for a minute or two." The guard's eyebrows went up. For a second, something like sympathy flickered across his face. But before he could answer, a loud voice cut through the air. "Yo, check it out. The homeless dude wants to give us a concert." Robert turned. It was one of the teenagers from before, the one with the expensive sneakers. He was pointing at Robert and laughing. His friends immediately joined in, pulling out their phones. "This is going to be hilarious," another kid said, already recording. Heat flooded Robert's face. His stomach twisted into knots. More people were stopping now, drawn by the commotion. A woman in a business suit paused mid-step. A man with shopping bags turned to look. A mother pulled her children closer as if Robert might be dangerous. Robert wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to run back outside and never come back. Every eye felt like a weight pressing down on him. "Dude, are you serious right now?" one of the teenagers asked, stepping closer. "You think they're gonna let you touch that piano? That thing probably costs more than everything you own." His friends burst out laughing. Robert's hands clenched into fists, not from anger but from shame. The teenager wasn't wrong. That piano probably did cost more than everything Robert owned. A lot more. Can I play for coins? Robert asked quietly, the words barely making it past his lips. The question hung in the air like smoke. Can I play for coins? He meant it literally. Would they let him perform for spare change? But it felt like a bigger question, too. Could he still offer something valuable to the world? Did he still matter? A woman in designer sunglasses scoffed loudly. Oh, this should be good, she muttered to her friend. Street entertainment, more phones came out. More people gathered. Robert counted at least 20 people now, forming a loose circle around him. Some looked curious. Some looked annoyed. Most looked entertained, like he was a show they hadn't paid for but would watch anyway. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. Look, man, I don't think... What's going on here? A new voice cut through the noise, sharp and authoritative. A woman in her 40s pushed through the crowd. She wore a blazer with a name tag that read, Christine Palmer, mall manager. Her expression was tired, like she'd already dealt with 10 problems before lunch. She looked at Robert, then at the crowd, then at the security guard. Gary, what's happening? The guard, Gary, scratched his head. This gentleman wants to play the piano. I was just explaining the mall policies. Christine looked at Robert properly now, really looked at him. Her eyes traveled from his worn boots to his military jacket to his weathered face. Something in her expression softened, just a fraction. You know how to play piano? She asked. Yes, ma'am. I do. Like actual playing, not just banging keys? Yes, ma'am. One of the teenagers snorted. Yeah, right. Christine shot the kid a look that could freeze water. Then she turned back to Robert. You're a veteran? Robert nodded, touching his jacket instinctively. Army, 2 tours. She was quiet for a moment, studying him. The crowd waited. Someone coughed. A baby cried somewhere in the distance. Robert's heart pounded so hard he thought everyone could hear it. Christine checked her watch. 5 minutes. You get 5 minutes. Don't touch anything else. Don't bother customers. And if you're wasting my time... She didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. Thank you, Robert whispered. Thank you so much. As he walked toward the piano, the crowd parted like water. But they didn't leave. If anything, more people gathered. Phones were everywhere, pointed at him like weapons. Robert heard whispers. Is this for real? Someone's live streaming this. I give him 30 seconds before he gives up. This is so cringe. Each step toward the piano felt like walking through mud. His legs shook. His hands trembled. Sweat dripped down his back despite the mall's air conditioning. What was he doing? What if he'd forgotten how to play? What if his hands seized up like they had so many times before? 3 years. 3 years since he'd touched a piano. What if the music was gone? The piano gleamed under the lights. It was beautiful. A black grand piano, perfectly maintained. Someone had left the bench slightly crooked. Robert carefully adjusted it, buying himself a few more seconds. He sat down slowly. The bench felt foreign and familiar at the same time, like meeting an old friend who'd become a stranger. His hands hovered over the keys, not quite touching them. The crowd's whispers grew louder. Someone laughed. Robert heard a teenage girl say, "He's not even playing. He's just sitting there." Probably doesn't even know how, her friend replied. Christine checked her watch again, her patience clearly thinning. Robert closed his eyes. His hands were shaking so badly now that he wasn't sure he could control them. In his mind, he heard all the voices from the past 3 years. The voices that told him he was nothing, that he'd thrown his life away, that he was broken beyond repair. But underneath those voices, quieter but stronger, he heard something else. Music. The music that had lived inside him since he was 5 years old. The music that had survived everything. War, trauma, poverty, shame. It was still there. It had always been there. He thought of his mother. How proud she'd been. How she'd sacrificed everything for his lessons. She'd died 2 years ago, never knowing what happened to him. He'd been too ashamed to go to her funeral. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered to himself. "I'm so sorry." Then his fingers touched the keys. The first note rang out clear and pure. Then another. And another. His hands remembered what his mind had tried to forget. They moved across the keyboard like they were coming home after a long journey. He started playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The same piece he'd played for his mother's birthday 20 years ago. The same piece that had won him his first major competition. The same piece that had made a critic write, "Robert doesn't just play the piano. He speaks through it." The notes started soft and gentle, almost hesitant, like someone testing whether it's safe to hope again. Then they grew stronger, more confident. The music swelled and filled the entire mall, reaching every corner, touching every person. The laughter stopped immediately. The whispers died. The teenage boy with the expensive sneakers stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his phone forgotten in his hand. Robert's eyes were closed, but tears ran down his cheeks. His fingers flew across the keys, playing passages that seemed impossible. The music poured out of him like water breaking through a dam. All the pain, all the loss, all the beauty he'd kept locked inside for 3 years. It all came flooding out through his fingers. The piano sang. It cried, it roared, it whispered. People walking by stopped mid-step. Store employees came out from behind their counters. More and more people gathered, drawn by the sound. The crowd swelled to 50, then 70, then more than 100. No one spoke. No one moved. They just listened. Robert played like a man who'd been drowning and finally found air. His body swayed with the music. His face showed every emotion the notes carried. This wasn't just playing. This was survival. This was proof that he was still alive, still human, still capable of creating something beautiful. The 5 minutes Christine had given him passed. Then 10, then 15. She didn't stop him. Nobody did. When Robert finally played the last note, his hands trembled on the keys. The sound faded slowly, echoing through the mall like a ghost. Then came the silence, that special silence that only follows something extraordinary, the kind of silence that feels holy. Robert opened his eyes. He'd almost forgotten where he was. Slowly, he turned to face the crowd, and then they erupted. The applause crashed over Robert like a wave. It started with one person, then another, then everyone at once. The sound was deafening. People were clapping, some were cheering, a few were wiping their eyes. Robert sat frozen on the piano bench, his hands still resting on the keys. He couldn't process what was happening. This wasn't mockery. This wasn't pity. This was real appreciation, the kind he hadn't heard in years. "Oh my God," someone said loudly. "That was incredible. Did you record that?" Another voice asked urgently. "Tell me you recorded that." "Already uploading it," came the reply. The teenage boy who'd mocked him earlier stood there looking pale. His phone hung limply in his hand. He looked like he'd just witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about the world. Robert slowly stood up from the bench. His legs felt weak. The crowd kept clapping, and it felt surreal, like a dream he might wake up from any second. Then someone pushed through the crowd. A woman in her 50s, wearing a university sweater and carrying a leather bag. Her hand was pressed against her mouth, and her eyes were wide with shock. "Wait," she said, her voice cutting through the applause. "Wait a second." The crowd quieted down, sensing something important was about to happen. The woman moved closer, staring at Robert like she was seeing a ghost. "Bobby? Bobby Mitchell?" Robert's heart stopped. Nobody had called him Bobby in years. That was the name from before. From his old life. He looked at the woman's face, really looked at it, and recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. "Professor Davis?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh my God, it really is you." The crowd buzzed with renewed interest. People leaned in closer, trying to hear. Professor Davis stepped right up to Robert, her face a mixture of joy and heartbreak. "What happened to you?" she whispered. "We looked everywhere. You just disappeared." Robert's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. Couldn't explain 3 years of failure and shame in front of all these strangers. But Professor Davis wasn't waiting for an answer. She turned to the crowd, her voice strong and clear. "Do you know who this man is?" she asked, pointing at Robert. "This is Robert Mitchell. Bobby Mitchell. He's not just someone who can play piano. He was one of the finest classical pianists of his generation." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones came back out, but this time people were searching, not just recording. Someone gasped, "Holy crap, she's right. Look at this." A young man held up his phone, showing a Wikipedia page. Robert Mitchell, child prodigy, performed at Carnegie Hall at age 22, won the International Piano Competition in 2015. "There are videos of him on YouTube," someone else said. Millions of views. The teenage boy who'd laughed at Robert was frantically scrolling through his phone. His face had gone from pale to red. Oh no, oh no, no, no. We just, Professor Davis continued, her voice getting stronger. Bobby taught at the Riverside Conservatory. He had students who went on to professional careers. He performed with symphony orchestras across the country. Critics called him brilliant, extraordinary. What happened? Christine, the mall manager, asked softly. How did you end up? She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone knew what she meant. How did someone so talented end up homeless? Robert found his voice finally. It came out rough and quiet. I enlisted. After my mom died, I needed to do something different. Something that mattered in a different way. You joined the military? Someone asked. Robert nodded, touching his worn jacket. Army. I served 2 tours overseas, Afghanistan. The crowd went even quieter. A few veterans in the group straightened up, recognizing something familiar in Robert's eyes. When I came back, Robert continued, his voice shaking. I wasn't the same. I had PTSD, still do. Every time I tried to play, I'd have panic attacks. The sounds, the piano keys hitting, it reminded me of things I wanted to forget. He paused, swallowing hard. This was the part he'd never told anyone. The part he was most ashamed of. I started missing classes, missing performances. I couldn't control the shaking. Couldn't sleep. The school had to let me go. They were kind about it, but I understood. You can't teach when you can't even hold yourself together. Professor Davis's hand covered her mouth. Tears ran down her cheeks. I burned through my savings on therapy, on rent, on just trying to survive, but nothing worked. The panic attacks got worse. I lost my apartment. Lost touch with friends. They tried to help, but I was too proud, too ashamed. I told myself I'd figure it out on my own. But you didn't, someone said gently. Not judgmental. Just stating a fact. No, Robert admitted. I didn't. And one day I woke up in a shelter, and then the shelter got too crowded, and then I was on the street. That was 3 years ago. A woman in the crowd was crying openly now. Others looked down at their feet, uncomfortable but unable to look away. Why today? Professor Davis asked. What made you come in here and play today? Robert looked at the piano, then back at the crowd. Because I realized I'd been running away from the one thing that always made me feel human. I was so afraid of the music because it hurt, but staying silent hurt worse. At least when I'm playing, I'm still me. I'm still Bobby. The teenage boy suddenly stepped forward. His face was red and he looked like he might throw up. Sir, I'm so sorry. What I said? What we did? I didn't know, but that's not an excuse. I was cruel and I'm sorry. His friends nodded, all looking equally ashamed. One of them was crying. Robert looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he did something nobody expected. He smiled. A real, genuine smile. It's okay, son. You gave me the push I needed. Sometimes we need someone to challenge us before we can prove ourselves wrong. The boy looked like he wanted to say more, but a new voice interrupted. Excuse me, sorry. Coming through. A woman with a professional camera and a microphone pushed through the crowd. She had a press badge hanging from her neck. I'm Jennifer Lopez from Channel 7 News. We got a call about something happening here. Can someone tell me what's going on? At least 5 people started talking at once, all trying to explain. Jennifer's eyes got wider as she listened. She looked at Robert, then at her cameraman. Are you rolling? She asked him urgently. Already am, he replied. Jennifer approached Robert with her microphone. Mr. Mitchell, would you be willing to talk to us? To share your story? Robert hesitated. Part of him wanted to run, to disappear back into invisibility where it was safe. But he looked at Professor Davis, who was nodding encouragingly. He looked at Christine, who was smiling with tears in her eyes. He looked at all these strangers who, minutes ago, had been ready to laugh at him. Yes, he said quietly. I'll talk. For the next 20 minutes, Robert told his story to the camera. He talked about his childhood, learning piano from his mother who cleaned houses to pay for lessons. He talked about the competitions and the performances. He talked about losing his mother and joining the military. He talked about the war and what it had done to his mind. He talked about the shame of homelessness, the invisibility, the feeling of being less than human, and he talked about music, how it had saved him once as a child and how today it had saved him again. The crowd kept growing. Store employees came out on their breaks, Shoppers stopped shopping. People shared the story on social media, and others rushed to the mall to see if it was real. By the time Robert finished talking, his story was already going viral. The video of his performance was being shared thousands of times per minute. People were commenting, sharing, crying over their screens, but Robert didn't know any of that yet. He just knew that for the first time in 3 years, people were looking at him and seeing a person. Not a problem, not an eyesore, not something to step around or ignore. They saw Bobby Mitchell, the pianist, the veteran, the human being who'd lost his way and found it again through music. Professor Davis pulled him into a tight hug. "We're going to help you," she whispered fiercely. "I promise you, Bobby. We're going to help you get back on your feet." Robert hugged her back, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The piano stood behind him, silent now, but somehow different. It wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a bridge from who he'd been, through who he'd become, to who he might be again. And for the first time in 3 years, Robert wasn't afraid to cross it. By that evening, Robert's video had been viewed over 2 million times. By the next morning, it was 15 million. By the end of the week, the number climbed past 50 million. The homeless veteran who played like an angel had become a global sensation, but Robert didn't know about any of that yet. He was sitting in a small coffee shop across from Professor Davis, holding a cup of hot chocolate with both hands. It was the first warm meal he'd had in days, and he couldn't stop the tears from falling. "I can't believe this is happening," he whispered, staring at the sandwich she'd bought him. He'd already eaten it too fast, his stomach aching from not being used to real food. Professor Davis reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Believe it, Bobby, the whole world is talking about you." She showed him her phone. The video was everywhere. News channels were running the story. Celebrities were sharing it. Comments poured in by the thousands. "This man deserves so much better. I'm crying at work right now. His talent is unreal. We need to help him. Someone start a fund. I'm a veteran too. This could have been me. This story hits different." Robert read the comments with shaking hands. He didn't know what to feel. Grateful, yes, but also exposed. Vulnerable. Scared. What if this was just temporary? What if in a week everyone forgot about him and he was back on the street? "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Professor Davis smiled. "Now we help you rebuild. But first, you need a place to stay. I've already called some people." Before Robert could respond, the coffee shop door opened. A man in his 60s walked in, looking around until he spotted them. He wore a veteran's cap and had kind eyes. "Bobby Mitchell?" the man asked, approaching their table. Robert nodded, suddenly nervous. "I'm Tom Brennan, Vietnam vet. Retired now, but I run a small veteran support center here in town." He pulled out a chair and sat down without asking. "I saw your video, heard your story, and I want you to know something. You're not alone anymore." Tom explained that his center had a few rooms for veterans in crisis. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe. You can stay as long as you need. No strings attached. We'll also connect you with the VA, get you proper treatment for your PTSD. Robert's throat tightened. "I don't have money to pay you." "Did I ask for money?" Tom said firmly. "You served your country. You're a brother. Brothers help each other." That night, Robert slept in a real bed for the first time in 3 years. The room was small, just a bed, a desk, and a closet. But to Robert, it felt like a palace. He lay awake for hours, afraid that if he fell asleep, he'd wake up back on the street and discover this had all been a dream. The next few days were a blur. Phone calls came nonstop. News interviews. Radio shows. People wanted to hear his story, to understand how someone so talented could fall so far. A local church started a fundraiser. Within 48 hours, they'd raised $30,000, then $50,000, then $100,000. People from around the world sent money, messages, support. "Use this to get back on your feet. You deserve a second chance. Your music touched my soul. Let me give something back." Robert was overwhelmed. He'd gone from invisible to seen by millions, from having nothing to having more support than he knew what to do with. But the most surprising call came on the 4th day. "Mr. Mitchell," a woman's voice said over the phone. "My name is Patricia Wong. I'm the director of Riverside Conservatory." Robert's heart stopped. The conservatory. The place he'd worked before, everything fell apart. the place where he'd felt most at home. "I've seen your video," Patricia continued, "and I want to apologize. When you left, when you were struggling, we should have done more. We should have fought harder to help you." "It wasn't your fault," Robert said quickly. "I pushed everyone away. Maybe. But we're here now and we want to make things right. How would you feel about coming back? Not as a professor yet. We understand you need time to heal. But maybe as a guest instructor? Work with students a few hours a week? No pressure. Just music." Robert couldn't speak. His hands trembled so badly he almost dropped the phone. "And Bobby?" Patricia added softly. "We'd also like to host a benefit concert for you. All proceeds would go directly to you and to Veteran Support Services. Would you be willing to play?" I don't know if I can," Robert admitted. "What if I freeze up again? What if the panic attacks come back? Then we'll be there to support you." "But Bobby, you played in a mall in front of strangers who were laughing at you. You've already proven you're stronger than your fear." That evening, Robert sat in Tom's office at the Veterans Center. On the desk was a pill bottle, proper medication for PTSD prescribed by a VA doctor. Next to it was a schedule for therapy sessions. And next to that was a contract from the conservatory. "What do you think?" Tom asked, watching Robert stare at everything. "I think I'm terrified," Robert admitted. "Good. Fear means it matters." Tom leaned back in his chair. "You know what I learned in Vietnam? The bravest guys weren't the ones who weren't scared. They were the ones who were scared as hell but did it anyway." Robert picked up the contract. The concert was scheduled for 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare. 6 weeks to face his demons and decide if he could really do this. "What if I fail?" he whispered. "What if you don't?" Tom replied. The teenager who'd mocked Robert showed up at the Veterans Center 3 days later. His name was Dylan, and he looked nervous as hell. "Mr. Mitchell," he said quietly when Robert opened the door. "Can we talk?" They sat outside on a bench. Dylan twisted his hands together, not making eye contact. "I can't stop thinking about what I did," he said finally. "How I treated you. My mom showed me the full video and I felt sick. You're this amazing person and I treated you like garbage." "Dylan," Robert said gently. "You apologized. We're good." "No, we're not." Dylan looked up and there were tears in his eyes. "I need to do something. To make it right somehow." "You already are. You came here. That takes courage. I want to help." Dylan pulled out his phone. "My dad owns a small business. He said he'd donate. And my friends and we started a social media campaign to raise awareness about veteran homelessness. We've already got like 50,000 followers." Robert stared at this kid who'd laughed at him just days ago. Now he was using his voice to help others. "Why?" Robert asked. Dylan wiped his eyes. "Because you taught me something. You can't judge people by what you see on the outside. Everyone has a story. Everyone has value. And I was so wrong about you." Over the next few weeks, Robert settled into a new routine. Mornings were for therapy, working through the trauma that had haunted him for years. Afternoons were for practice, his fingers slowly remembering their old strength. Evenings were for teaching, just 2 or 3 students at first, all of them veterans like him, learning to find peace through music. Professor Davis visited often, bringing sheet music and encouragement. Christine, the mall manager, stopped by with groceries. Tom checked on him every day, and Dylan came twice a week to help with social media, turning Robert's story into a movement. Messages flooded in from veterans across the country. "Your story gave me hope. I've been homeless for 6 months. Seeing you turn it around makes me believe I can too. Thank you for not giving up." Robert read every single message, and slowly he began to understand something profound. His fall from grace, his years on the street, his struggle, it had all led to this moment. To a place where he could use his pain to help others, to show people that failure isn't final, that second chances exist, that you can lose everything and still find your way back. The benefit concert date crept closer. Robert's anxiety grew with each passing day. What if he froze on stage? What if the crowd's expectations were too high? What if he'd forgotten how to really perform? But every time doubt crept in, he'd look at the messages from other veterans. He'd remember the teenager who'd changed because of one moment. He'd think about all the people who'd helped him when he needed it most. 1 week before the concert, Robert sat at the piano in the conservatory's practice room. His fingers moved across the keys, playing the piece he'd performed in the mall. Rachmaninoff. The same piece his mother had loved. As he played, he felt her presence. Not in a supernatural way, but in the music itself. In every note, every chord, every moment of beauty that rose from those keys. She'd believed in him when no one else did. She'd sacrificed everything for his gift, and now, finally, he was honoring that sacrifice. Not by being perfect, not by never failing, but by getting back up after falling. By playing again after years of silence. By letting his music matter again. The practice room door opened quietly. Patricia stood there listening. When Robert finished, she was crying. "She'd be so proud of you," Patricia said softly. Robert nodded, unable to speak, because he knew she was right. His mother wouldn't be proud because he was famous or talented. She'd be proud because he'd survived, because he'd found his way back to himself. 1 week, Patricia said. The theater's already sold out. 3,000 people want to hear you play. 3,000 people. The number should have terrified him. Instead, Robert felt something different, something he hadn't felt in years. He felt ready. The night of the concert, Robert stood backstage at the Riverside Theater, his hands shaking. He could hear the crowd on the other side of the curtain. 3,000 people, all of them waiting for him. "You okay?" Tom asked, standing beside him in his dress uniform. He'd insisted on being there, said he wouldn't miss it for the world. "I'm terrified," Robert admitted honestly. "Good answer." Tom squeezed his shoulder. "But look at me. You've already done the hardest part. You survived. You came back. Playing piano? That's the easy part." Robert tried to smile, but his stomach was doing flips. What if he failed? What if this was too much too soon? What if everyone realized he wasn't as good as they remembered? Professor Davis appeared from around the corner, beautiful in a blue dress. "Bobby, there's someone here to see you." She stepped aside and Dylan walked forward. But he wasn't alone. Behind him were his friends, all 5 teenagers who'd laughed at Robert that day in the mall. They all wore matching t-shirts that read "Second Chances Matter." "Mr. Mitchell," Dylan said formally, "we wanted to be here tonight to support you and to say thank you for teaching us something important." One of the other boys stepped forward, the one who'd been recording on his phone that day. "Sir, I've been volunteering at a homeless shelter every weekend since we met you. You changed how I see people." A girl with bright eyes spoke next. "I started a club at our school. We raise money for veteran services. We've collected over $10,000 so far." Robert's eyes filled with tears. These kids who'd seen him at his lowest had become some of his biggest supporters. They hadn't just said sorry, they'd changed their lives. "Thank you," Robert whispered. "All of you. You have no idea what this means to me." 5 minutes, Mr. Mitchell," a stage hand called out. Robert's heart hammered. 5 minutes. 5 minutes until he faced the biggest moment of his comeback. Patricia appeared, elegant and calm. "The theater is completely full. We had to turn away 200 people, but we're live streaming for free, so thousands more are watching online." She paused, her eyes soft. "Bobby, whatever happens out there tonight, you've already won. You've already inspired more people than you know." The lights in the theater dimmed. Robert heard the crowd quiet down. This was it. He walked to the edge of the stage, peeking through the curtain. The theater was magnificent. Red velvet seats filled with people. The grand piano sat center stage, spotlit and waiting. In the front row, he could see Tom in his uniform. Professor Davis wiping her eyes. Christine from the mall. Dylan and his friends. The reporter who'd first shared his story. And in the very front, in a seat marked reserved, was a framed photo of his mother. Patricia had arranged it. Robert's breath caught in his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia's voice rang out over the speakers. 6 weeks ago, a man walked into Riverside Mall and asked if he could play piano for coins. He was homeless. He was struggling. Many people that day didn't see his value. The audience was completely silent. But when Robert Mitchell touched those piano keys, the world remembered something important, that every person has worth. That talent doesn't disappear just because life gets hard. That courage isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up. Robert heard people in the audience sniffling. Someone coughed to hide their emotion. Tonight, Robert returns to the stage where he belongs. All proceeds from this concert will go to veteran services and homeless support programs. But more than that, tonight we witnessed something rare and beautiful. A second chance. The curtain began to rise. Robert walked out slowly, his legs feeling like rubber. The spotlight hit him, and suddenly he couldn't see the audience anymore. just the piano, and his mother's photo. The applause started before he even reached the bench. It built and built, people standing, clapping, cheering. Robert stood beside the piano, overwhelmed. He'd forgotten what this felt like. To be celebrated. To be valued. When the applause finally died down, Robert sat at the piano. He adjusted the bench, just like he'd done that day in the mall. His hands hovered over the keys. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he said into the microphone attached to the piano. His voice shook. "6 weeks ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But I learned something important." He paused, gathering courage. "Music never left me. It was always there, waiting, and neither did hope. Even when I couldn't see it, people around me were hoping for me, believing in me. Tom, Professor Davis, Christine, Dylan, and his friends. You all believed when I couldn't." His voice cracked with emotion. "This concert isn't just for me. It's for every veteran who's struggling. For every person who's lost their way. For everyone who thinks it's too late to start over." He looked at his mother's photo. "And it's for my mom, who taught me that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest." Then his fingers touched the keys. He started with the Rachmaninoff piece from the mall, but this time it was different. More mature, more emotional. Every note carried weight. The music told a story of loss and pain, but also of hope and resilience. Robert's eyes closed as he played. His body swayed with the music. The months of therapy, the healing, the support, it all flowed through his fingers. This wasn't just a performance. It was a testimony. Proof that broken things could be made beautiful again. When he finished the first piece, the applause was thunderous. But Robert didn't stop. He played Chopin, then Beethoven, then a piece he'd composed himself during his recovery. He called it The Long Road Home. This new composition was different from anything he'd played before. It had rough edges, raw emotions. The melody spoke of cold nights on the street, of shame and loneliness, but it also spoke of kindness from strangers, of second chances, of finding light in the darkness. As he played his original piece, Robert opened his eyes and looked at the audience. They were crying. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come from witnessing something true and human and real. The music swelled to its final movement, not triumphant exactly, but peaceful. Like someone finally coming home after a long, hard journey. The last notes hung in the air, then faded to silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the entire theater erupted. People stood, clapping, cheering, crying. The standing ovation lasted 10 full minutes. Robert stood at the piano, tears streaming down his face, taking it all in. But the night wasn't over. After the applause finally settled, Tom joined Robert on stage. "We have a surprise," he announced. Robert's story touched so many people that we've established something permanent. The Robert Mitchell Foundation for Veteran Musicians. The audience cheered again. This foundation will help veterans with PTSD reconnect with their artistic passions. We'll provide instruments, lessons, therapy, and support. Because Robert proved something, that creativity can heal. That art can save lives. Dylan and his friends came on stage next, presenting Robert with the first donation from their school fundraiser. Then others came forward. Local business owners, former students, people who'd seen the video and traveled hours to be there. By the end of the night, the foundation had raised over $300,000. But the real magic happened after the concert. Robert stayed for 2 hours, meeting people, veterans who'd been inspired by his story, parents who wanted their kids to meet him, young musicians who saw him as proof that setbacks don't define you. One older veteran, a man in his 70s, gripped Robert's hand with tears in his eyes. "I haven't touched my guitar in 15 years. PTSD took that from me. But watching you tonight, I'm going to try again. You gave me hope." That's when Robert finally understood. His music wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed to believe in second chances. Everyone who'd lost something and wondered if they could find it again. 3 months after the concert, Robert stood in front of his first official class at the conservatory. 10 students, all of them veterans, all of them struggling with PTSD or trauma, all of them looking for a way back to themselves through music. "Music won't fix everything," Robert told them honestly. "It won't erase the past or make the nightmares stop completely, but it will remind you of something important, that you're still capable of creating beauty, that you still matter, that your story isn't over." One student, a young woman who'd served in Iraq, raised her hand. What if we're not good enough? What if we've forgotten how? Robert smiled. Then we'll remember together. That's what this is about. Not perfection. Just persistence. He sat at the piano and began to play something simple. One by one, his students joined in with their instruments. The music wasn't perfect. Some notes were wrong. The rhythm wasn't quite right. But it was honest. It was real. It was healing, and that was enough. Outside the practice room, Dylan and his friends were setting up for their weekly volunteer session, helping connect homeless veterans with resources. Professor Davis was in her office, reviewing applications from students who wanted to join Robert's program. Tom was at the Veterans Center, showing Robert's video to a new arrival who'd lost all hope. The ripple effect of one moment, one decision to be brave, continued to spread. Robert looked at his students, all of them finding their way back to themselves through music, and he thought about that day in the mall, the mockery, the fear. The moment he chose courage over comfort, he'd asked if he could play for coins. But what he'd really been asking was if he still had value, if he still mattered, if he could still contribute something beautiful to the world. The answer, he now knew, was yes. It had always been yes. He just needed to remember how to see it. And in helping himself remember, he'd helped thousands of others remember too. That was the real music. Not the notes on the page, but the lives that changed, the hope that spread, the proof that it's never too late to come home to yourself. Robert Mitchell had found his way back. And he'd lit the path for others to follow.